The Biology of Belief, Unleashing the Power of Consciousness, Matter, and Miracles by Bruce Lipton. On the back cover, stunning new scientific discoveries about the biochemical effects of the brain's functioning show that all the cells of our body are affected by our thoughts. The implications of this research radically change our perception of life. It shows that genes and DNA do not control our biology. DNA is controlled by signals from outside the cell, including energetic messages emanating from our positive and negative thoughts. Using clear, recognizable language, illustrations, humor, and everyday examples, Bruce Lipton demonstrates how the new science of epigenetics is revolutionizing our understanding of the link between mind and matter and the profound effects it has on our personal lives and the life of our species. This book will forever change how you think about your own thinking. Comment. In a style that's as accessible as it is meaningful, Dr. Bruce Lipton offers nothing less than the long-sought-after missing link between life and consciousness. I have no doubt the biology of belief will become a cornerstone for the science of the new millennium. Prologue. If you could be anybody, who would you be? I used to spend an inordinate amount of time pondering that question. I was obsessed with the fantasy of changing my identity because I wanted to be anybody but me. I had a good career as a cell biologist, medical school professor. That didn't make up for the fact my personal life was shambles. The harder I tried to find happiness and satisfaction in my personal life, the more dissatisfied and unhappy I became. In my reflective moments, I resolved to surrender to my unhappy life. I decided that fate had dealt me a bad hand and I should simply accept it. In the fall of 1985, my depressed, fatalistic attitude changed in one transformational moment. I resigned my tenure position at the School of Medicine that I was teaching. Because the school was so far from the academic mainstream, I had the opportunity to think outside the rigid parameters of belief that prevail in conventional academia. Far from the ivory towers isolated on an emerald island in the deep Caribbean Sea, I experienced a scientific epiphany that shattered my beliefs about the nature of life. My life-changing moment occurred while I was reviewing my research on the mechanisms by which cells control their physiology and behavior. Suddenly, I realized that a cell's life is fundamentally controlled by the physical and energetic environment with only a small contribution by its genes. Genes are simply molecular blueprints used in the construction of cells, tissues, and organs. The environment serves as a contractor who reads and engages the blueprints and is responsible for the character of a cell's life. It's a single cell's awareness of the environment that sets it into motion the mechanisms of life. As a cell biologist, I knew my insights had powerful ramifications for my life and the lives of all human beings. I was acutely aware that each of us is made up of 50 trillion cells. I devoted my professional life to understand single cells because I know the better we understand single cells, the better we understand the community of cells that make up our human body. Single cells are controlled by their awareness of the environment. So too are we trillion-celled human beings. Just like a single cell, the character of our lives is determined not by our genes, but by our response to the environmental signals that propel life. On the one hand, this new understanding of the nature of life was a jolt. For close to 2 decades, I've been programming biology's central dogma, the belief that life is controlled by genes, into the minds of medical students. On the other hand, my new understanding was not a complete surprise. I'd always had niggling doubts about genetic determinism. Some of the doubts stem from my 18 years of government-funded research of cloning stem cells. Though it took a sojourn outside traditional academia for me to realize it, My research offered incontrovertible proof that biology's most cherished tenets regarding genetic determinism were fundamentally flawed. My new understanding of the nature of life not only corroborated my stem cell research, but contradicted another belief of mainstream science of the time. I've been propounding to my students the belief that allopathic medicine is the only kind of medicine that merits consideration in medical school. By finally giving the energy-based environment its due, it provided a grand convergence uniting science and the practice of allopathic medicine, complementary medicine, and spiritual wisdom of ancient and modern faiths. On a personal level, I knew at the moment of insight I'd gotten myself stuck simply by believing I was fated to have spectacular, unsuccessful personal life. There's no doubt human beings have a great capacity for sticking to false beliefs with great passion and tenacity. Hyper-rational scientists are not immune. Our well-developed nervous systems, headed by our big brain, is a testament that our awareness is far more complicated than that of a single cell. When our uniquely human minds get involved, we can choose to perceive the environment in different ways, unlike a single cell whose awareness is more reflexive. I was exhilarated by the new realization that I could change the character of my life by changing my beliefs. I was instantly energized because I realized there was a science-based path that would take me from my job as a victim to my new position as co-creator of my destiny. It has been more than 25 years since that magical night in the Caribbean. Throughout the intervening years, biological research has continued to corroborate the knowledge I gained that morning. Today, two newly evolved fields of science representing the most important areas of biomedical research substantiate these conclusions offered in this book, The Biology of Belief. First, the science of signal transduction focuses on the biochemical pathways by which cells respond to environmental cues. Environmental signals engage cytoplasmic processes that can alter gene expression and thereby control cell fate, influence cell movement, control cell survival, even sentence a cell to death. Signal transduction science recognizes that the fate and behavior of an organism is directly linked to its perception of the environment. In simple terms, the character of our life is based on how we perceive it. Wow. Second, the new science of epigenetics, which literally means control above the genes, has completely upended our conventional understanding of genetic control. Epigenetics is the science of how environmental signals select, modify, and regulate gene activity. This new awareness reveals the activity of our genes is constantly being modified in response to life experiences, which again emphasizes that our perceptions of life shape our biology. Months after this book was first published, an article in one of the most prestigious journals, Nature, revealed exciting new epigenetic insights on how the environment controls gene activity in stem cells, which coincidentally is the same subject and conclusion I offer in Chapter 2. I must admit I was amused by the fact that my chapter is entitled, It's the Environment, Stupid, while the most recent Nature article was titled, It's the Ecology, Stupid. Essentially, we are on the same page. Some scientists in reviewing this book asked, so what's new about this work? Leading edge scientists are familiar with the concepts proposed. That's a good thing. The problem is related that over 99% of the rest of the population, the lay audience, is still operating from antiquated, disempowering beliefs about being victims of their genes. While research scientists might be familiar with this new and truly radical shift in awareness, these insights have yet to trickle down to the general public. The media worsens the situation by misleading the public with a never-ending onslaught of stories, presumably identifying a gene that controls this cancer or that malady. Consequently, the intention behind this book is to translate the significance of this leading-edge science so it's accessible to the lay audience. It's my sincerest hope you'll recognize that many of the beliefs propelling your life are false and self-limiting. You'll be inspired to change those beliefs. Understanding on a scientific level how cells respond to your thoughts and perceptions illuminates the path to personal empowerment. The insights we gain through this new biology unleash the power of consciousness, matter, and miracles. The Biology of Belief is not a self-help book, it's a self-empowerment book. The information offers knowledge of self. From that knowledge comes the power to control your life. This information is powerful. I know it is. The life I have created using this awareness is so much richer and satisfying that I no longer ask myself, if I could be anybody, who would I be? For now, the answer is a no-brainer. I want to be me. Wow. That goes along with what I do with the Airway Center, is helping people believe their jaws can change and making it happen. Okay, introduction, which is about 15 pages. Introduction, the magic of cells. I was 7 years old when I stepped up on a small box in Mrs. Novak's second grade classroom, high enough to plop my eye right on the lens on an eyepiece of a microscope. I was too close to see anything but a blob of light. I calmed down enough to listen to the instructions. Then it happened, an event so dramatic it would set the course for the rest of my life. A paramecium swam in the field. I was mesmerized. The raucous din of the other kids faded. The back-to-school smells of freshly sharpened pencils, new waxy crowns, and pencil cases. My whole being was transfixed by the alien world of this cell that was more exciting than today's computer-animated special effects movies. In the innocence of my child mind, I saw this organism not as a cell, but as a microscopic person, a thinking, sentient being. Rather than aimlessly moving around, this microscopic single-cell organism appeared to be on a mission, though what kind of mission I didn't know. I watched over the paramecium's shoulder as it busily comported itself around the mat. While I was focusing on the cell, a large pseudopod ganglia amoeba began to ooze in the field. Just then my visit to the world ended abruptly when Glenn, the class bully, yanked me off the step and demanded his turn at the microscope. I tried to get Mrs. Novak's attention, hoping Glenn's personal foul would get me another minute at the microscope free throw line. But it was just minutes before lunchtime. Other kids in the line were clamoring for their turn. Immediately after school, I ran home and relayed my microscopic adventure to my mother. Using my best second-grade powers of persuasion, I asked, begged, cajoled my mother into getting me a microscope, where I'd spend hours mesmerized by this alien world that I could access via the miracle of optics. Later in graduate school, I advanced to an electron microscope. The advantage is 1,000 times more powerful. The difference between the microscopes is analogous between the 25-cent observation telescopes with tourists and the Hubble telescope that transmits images of deep space. Entering the electron microscopy suite of laboratories is a rite of passage for aspiring biologists. You enter through a black revolving door, similar to the one separating photographic darkrooms. I remember the first time I stepped in the revolving door and began to turn it. I was in darkness between two worlds, my life as a student and my future as a scientist. When the door completed its rotation, I went into the dark chamber, dimly lit. As my eyes adapted to the available light, I became awed by what stood before me. The red lights reflecting off the mirrored surface of a foot-thick chromium steel column of electromagnetic lenses that rose to the ceiling in the center of the room. Spreading on either side at the base of the column was a large control console. It resembled the instrument panels of a Boeing 747 airplane with switches, gauges, indicator lamps. Power cords, water hoses, vacuum lines radiated. The sound of clanking vacuum pumps, refrigerated water recirculators. For all I knew, I emerged on the command deck of the USS Enterprise. Apparently, it was Captain Kirk's day off. Sitting at the console was one of my professors, who was engaged in the procedure of introducing a tissue specimen into a high vacuum chamber in the middle of the steel column. While the minutes passed, I experienced a feeling reminiscent of the first day in second grade when I first saw a cell. Finally, a green fluorescent image appeared on the phosphor screen. The presence of darkly stained cells could barely be discerned in the plastic sections, which were enlarged to about 30 times their original size. Then the magnification was increased, first 100 times, 1,000 times, 10,000 times. Then the cells were magnified to over 100,000 times their size. Indeed, Star Trek. But rather than outer space, we're going deep into space, where no man has gone before. One moment, I was observing a miniature cell. Seconds later, deep into its molecular architecture. My awe at being at the edge of the scientific frontier was palpable. So was my excitement. I was made honorary co-pilot. I put my hands on the controls so I could fly over this alien cellular landscape. My professor was my tour guide, pointing out notable cellular landmarks. Here's a mitochondrion. There's the Golgi body, nuclear pore, collagen molecule, a ribosome. Most of the rush I experienced came from my vision of myself as a pioneer, traversing territory never seen by human eyes. While the light microscope gave me an awareness of cells as creatures, it was the electron microscope that brought me face to face with the molecules that were the foundation of life. I knew buried within the cell were clues that would provide insight into the mysteries of life. For a brief moment, the microscope's portholes became a crystal ball. In the green glow of fluorescent screen, I saw my future. I was going to be a cellular biologist whose research would focus on scrutinizing every nuance of the cell's ultrastructure and gain insights into the secrets of cellular life. As I learned in graduate school, the structure and function of biological organisms are intimately intertwined. By correlating the cell's microscopic anatomy with behavior, I was sure to gain insight into the nature of nature. Throughout graduate school and into my career, my hours were consumed by exploration into the cell's anatomy. Locked within the cell structure were the secrets of its functions. My exploration of the secrets of life led me into a research career studying the character of cloned human cells grown in tissue culture. 10 years after my first close encounter with an electron microscope, I was a tenured faculty member at the prestigious School of Medicine, internationally recognized for my research on cloning stem cells. Honored for my teaching, I graduated to more powerful electron microscopes that allowed me to take three-dimensional rides through organisms where I directly experienced molecular anatomy and saw the magic of life. Though my tools were sophisticated, my approach had not changed. I never lost my 7-year conviction that the lives of the cells had purpose. Unfortunately, I had no such conviction that my own life had a purpose. I didn't believe in God, though I confess on occasion I entertained the notion of a God who ruled with an extremely honed, perverse sense of humor. I was, after all, a traditional biologist for whom God's existence is an unnecessary question. Life is the consequence of blind chance, the flip of a friendly card, or to be more precise, the random shake of genetic dice. The motto of our own profession since the time of Charles Darwin has been, God, we don't need God. It's not that Darwin denied the existence of God. He simply applied that chance, not divine intervention, was responsible for the character of life on Earth. In his book, The Origin of Species, Darwin said individual traits are passed from parents to children. He suggested hereditary factors passed from parent to child control the characteristics of an individual's life. That bit of insight set scientists on a frenzied attempt to dissect life down to molecular nuts and bolts. Within the structure of the cell was found to be the hereditary mechanisms that controlled life. The search came to end 50 years ago when James Watson and Francis Crick described the structure of the DNA double helix, which make genes. Scientists figured out the nature of the hereditary factors that Darwin had written about. The tabloids heralded the brave new world of genetic engineering with its promise of designer babies, magic bullet medical treatments, I remember the headlines that filled the front page. Secrets of Life Discovered in 1953. Like the tabloids, biologists jumped on the gene bandwagon. The mechanism by which DNA controls biological life became the central dogma of molecular biology, painstakingly spelled out in textbooks. In the long-running debate over nature versus nurture, the pendulum swung decidedly to nature. At first, DNA was thought to be responsible only for our physical characteristics. Then we started believing our genes control our emotions and behavior. So if you're born with defective happiness gene, you can expect to have an unhappy life. Unfortunately, I thought I was one of those people, victimized by a missing or mutant happiness gene. I was reeling from a relentless barrage of debilitating emotional roundhouse punches. My father had just died after a long, pain-fraught battle with cancer. I was his principal caretaker, had spent the previous 4 months flying back and forth between my job in Wisconsin and his home in New York every 3 or 4 days. In between stays at his deathbed, I was trying to maintain a research program, teach, and write grants. To further compound my stress, I was in the midst of an emotionally draining, economically devastating divorce. My financial resources were rapidly depleted. I tried to feed and clothe my new dependents, the judicial system. Economically challenged, homeless, I found myself living out of a suitcase in a most abysmal garden apartment complex. Most of my neighbors were hoping to upgrade their living standards by seeking accommodations in trailer parks. I was particularly scared of my next door neighbors. My apartment was broken into, my new stereo system stolen in my first week of residence. A week later, a 6-foot-tall, 3-foot-wide Bubba knocked down my door, holding a quart of beer in one hand and picking his teeth with a penny pen nail in the other. Bubba wanted to know if I had the directions for the tape deck. The nadir was the day I threw the phone through the glass door of my office, shattering the Bruce Lipton Associate Professor, School of Medicine sign, all the while screaming, "Get me out of here." My meltdown was precipitated by a phone call from a banker who politely but firmly told me he could not approve my mortgage application. It was like the scene from Terms of Endearment when Deborah Winger aptly responds to her husband's hopes for tenure. "We don't have enough money to pay the bills now. All tenure means is we won't have enough money forever." The magic of cells, deja vu. Luckily, I found an escape in the form of short-term sabbatical at a medical school in the Caribbean. I knew all my problems would not disappear there, but as the jet broke through the gray cloud cover of Chicago, it felt that way. I bit inside my cheek to prevent the smile on my face from evolving into audible laughter. I felt as joyful as my 7-year-old self for first discovering my life's passion, the magic of cells. My mood lifted even more on the 6-passenger commuter plane that took me to Montserrat, a mere 4 by 12 mile dot in the Caribbean Sea. If there was ever a Garden of Eden, it probably would have resembled my new island home, erupting out of the sparkling aquamarine sea like a giant multifaceted emerald. When we landed, the gardenia-laced balmy breeze that swept the airport's tarmac were intoxicating. The native custom was to dedicate the sunset period as time of quiet contemplation, a custom I readily adopted. As each day wound down, I looked forward to the heavenly light show. My house, on a cliff 50 feet above the ocean, faced west. A winding path through the fern led me down to the water. At the bottom, an opening of the wall of jasmine bushes revealed a secluded beach where I had a sunset ritual, washing away the day with a few laps in the water. After my swim, I would mold the beach into a comfortable recliner, sit back, and watch the sunset slowly into the sea. On that remote island, I was out of the rat race, free to see the world without the blinders of civilization's dogmatic beliefs. At first, my mind was constantly reviewing and critiquing the debacle that was my life. But soon my mental Siskel and Ebert ceased their thumbs up, thumbs down review of my 40 years. I began to re-experience what it was like to live in the moment, for the moment. I became reacquainted with sensations last experienced as a carefree child, to again feel the pleasure of being alive. I became more human, more humane, while living in that island paradise. I also became a better cell biologist. Almost all my formal scientific training was in sterile, lifeless classrooms, lecture halls, laboratories. Once I was immersed in the Caribbean's rich ecosystem, I began to appreciate biology as a living, breathing, integrating system rather than a collection of individual species sharing a piece of Earth's turf. Sitting quietly within garden-like island jungles, snorkeling among the jeweled coral reefs gave me a window on the island's amazing integration of plant-animal species. All live in a delicate, dynamic balance, not only with other life forms, but with the physical environment as well. It was life's harmony, not life's struggle, that sang out to me as I sat in the Caribbean Garden of Eden. I became convinced contemporary biology pays too little attention to the important role of cooperation because its Darwinian roots emphasize life's competitive nature. To the chagrin of my U.S. faculty colleagues, I returned to Wisconsin, a screaming radical bent on challenging the sacred foundational beliefs of biology. I even began to openly criticize Charles Darwin and the wisdom of his theory of evolution. In the eyes of most other biologists, my behavior was tantamount to a priest bursting into the Vatican and claiming the Pope was a fraud. My colleagues could be forgiven for thinking a coconut had hit me on the head when I quit my tenure position and fulfilling my life's dream to be in a rock and roll band, took off on a music tour. I discovered Yanni, who eventually became a big celebrity and produced a laser show with him. But it soon became clear I had a lot more aptitude for teaching and research than I did producing rock and roll shows. I wound down my midlife crisis, which I'll describe in more agonizing detail in a later chapter, by giving up the music business and returning to the Caribbean to teach cell biology again. My final stop in conventional academia was at Stanford University School of Medicine. By that time, I was an unabashed proponent of new biology. I'd come to question the Darwin dog-to-eat-dog version of evolution, also biology's central dogma, the premise that genes control life. That scientific premise has one major flaw. Genes cannot turn themselves on or off. In more scientific terms, genes are not self-emergent. Something in the environment has to trigger gene activity. Though the fact had already been established by frontier science, conventional scientists, blinded by genetic dogma, had simply ignored it. My outspoken challenge of the central dogma turned me into more of a scientific heretic. Not only was I a candidate for excommunication, I was now suitable for burning at the stake. In a lecture during my interview at Stanford, I found myself accusing the gathered faculty, many of them internationally recognized scientists, of being no better than religious fundamentalists for adhering to the central dogma despite evidence to the contrary. After my sacrilegious comments, the lecture room erupted into shouts of outrage that I thought meant the end of my job application. Instead, my insights concerning the mechanisms of new biology proved to be provocative enough to get me hired. With the support of some eminent scientists at Stanford, especially the pathology department's chairman, I was encouraged to pursue my ideas and apply them to research on cloned human cells. To the surprise of those around me, the experiments fully supported the alternative view of biology that I was postulating. I published 2 papers based on this research and left academia, this time for good. I left because despite the support I got at Stanford, I felt my message was falling on deaf ears. Since my departure, new research consistently validated my skepticism about the central dogma and the primacy of DNA in controlling life. In fact, epigenetics, the study of molecular mechanisms by which environment controls gene activity, is today one of the most active areas of scientific research. The newly emphasized role of the environment in regulating gene activity was the focus of my cell research 25 years ago, long before the field of epigenetics was even established. While that's gratifying for me intellectually, I know if I were teaching and researching in medical school, my colleagues would still be wondering about those coconuts, because in the last decade, I've become even more of a radical by academia's standard. My preoccupation with the new biology has become more than an intellectual exercise. I believe that cells teach us not only about the mechanisms of life, but also teach us how to live rich, full lives. In ivory tower science, that kind of thinking would no doubt win me the wacky Dr. Dolittle Award for anthropomorphism, or more precisely, cytopomorphism, thinking like a cell. But for me, it's biology 101. You may consider yourself an individual, but as a cell biologist, I can tell you, you are in truth a cooperative community of 50 trillion cells, citizens. Almost all the cells that make up your body are amoeba-like, individual organisms that have evolved a cooperative strategy for mutual survival. Reduced to basic terms, human beings are simply the consequence of collective amoebic consciousness. As a nation that reflects the trait of its citizens, our humanness must reflect the basic nature of our cellular communities. Living the lessons of cells. Using these cell communities as role models, I came to the conclusion that we are not victims of our genes, but masters of our fates, able to create lives overflowing with peace, happiness, and love. I tested my hypothesis in my own life after a nudge from my audiences who asked me why my insights hadn't made me any happier. They were right. I needed to integrate my new biological awareness in my daily life. I knew I succeeded on a bright Sunday morning in the coffee shop. Waitress asked me, "Honey, you're the happiest person I ever did see. Tell me, child, why are you so happy?" I was taken back by her question. Nevertheless, I blurted out, "I'm in heaven." The waitress shook her head from side to side, mumbling, my, then proceeded to take my order. Well, it was true. I was happier than I had ever been in my life. A number of you critical readers may rightly be skeptical of my claim that earth is heaven, for by definition, heaven is also the abode of deity and the blessed dead. Did I really think New Orleans or any other major city could be part of heaven? Ragged homeless women and children living in alleys, air so thick one could never know if the stars existed, rivers and lakes so polluted, only unimaginable scary life forms could exist in them. This earth is heaven? The deity lives here? He knows the deity? The answers to those questions are yes, I believe I do. Well, to be completely honest, I must admit I don't know all of the deity personally, for I don't know all of you. There are over 6 billion of you. To be more fully honest, I don't really know all the members of the plant and animal kingdom. I believe they're also all comprised of part of God. And the immortal words of Tool of Time's Tim Taylor, "Back the truck up." Is he saying that humans are God? Well, yes, I am. Of course, I'm not the first to have said that. It's written in Genesis that we're made in the image of God. Yes, this card-carrying rationalist is now quoting Jesus, Buddha, and Rumi. I've come full circle from a reductionist scientific take on life to a spiritual one. We're made in the image of God. We need to put spirit back into the equation when we want to improve our physical and our mental health. Because we are not powerless biochemical machines, popping a pill every time we're mentally or physically out of tune is not the answer. Drugs and surgery are powerful tools when they're not overused. But the notion of simple drug fixes is fundamentally flawed. Every time a drug is introduced into the body to correct function A, it inevitably throws off functions B, C, D. It's not gene-directed hormones and neurotransmitters that control our bodies and minds. Our beliefs control our bodies and minds, and thus our lives. O ye of little belief. The light outside the box. In this book, I'll draw on the proverbial line in the sand. One side of the line is a world defined by neo-Darwinism, which casts life as an unending war among battling biochemical robots, pharmaceutical, and chemistry. On the other side of the line is the new biology, which casts life as a cooperative journey among powerful individuals who can program themselves to create joy-filled lives. When we cross that line and truly understand new biology, we'll no longer fractiously debate the role of nurture and nature, because we'll realize that fully conscious mind trumps both nature and nurture. I believe we'll experience a profound paradigm change to humanity, as when a round world reality was introduced to a flat world civilization. Humanities majors who may be worried that this book offers an incomprehensible science lecture have no fear. When I was an academic, I chafed at the three-piece itchy suit, the constricting tie, the shoes, the meetings, but I love to teach. In my post-academia life, I've gotten plenty of teaching practice. I presented the principles of the new biology to thousands of people around the world. Through those lectures, I've honed my presentation of the science into easy-to-understand English, illustrated by colorful charts. Many are replicated in this book. In Chapter 1, I discuss smart cells, why and how they can teach us about our own minds and bodies. Chapter 2, I lay out the scientific evidence to show you that genes do not control biology. I introduce you to the exciting discoveries of epigenetics, a new field of biology that's unraveling the mysteries of how the environment, nature, influences the behavior of cells without changing the genetic code. It's a field that's uncovering new complexities and the nature of disease, including cancer and schizophrenia. Chapter 3 is about the cell's membrane, the skin of the cell. You no doubt have heard more about the DNA-containing nucleus of the cell than you have about its membrane. But frontier science is revealing ever greater detail what I concluded over 20 years ago, that the membrane is the true brain of the cellular operation. In Chapter 4, I talk about the mind-bending discoveries of quantum physics. Those discoveries have a profound implication for understanding and treating disease. However, the conventional medical establishment has not yet incorporated quantum physics into its research or medical school training, with tragic results. Chapter 5, I explain why I named the book The Biology of Belief. Positive thoughts have a profound effect on behavior and genes, but only when they're in harmony with subconscious programming. Negative thoughts have an equally powerful effect. When we recognize how these positive and negative beliefs control our biology, we can use this knowledge to create lives filled with health and happiness. Chapter 6 reveals why cells and people need to grow, how fear shuts down that growth. Chapter 7 focuses on conscious parenting. As parents, we need to understand the role we play in programming our children's beliefs, the impact those beliefs have on our children's lives. This chapter is important whether you're a parent or not. As a former child, the insight into our programming and its impact on our lives is quite revealing. In the epilogue, I review how my understanding of the new biology led me to realize the importance of integrating the realm of spirit and science, which was a radical shift from my background as an agnostic scientist. Are you ready to use your conscious mind to create a life overflowing with health, happiness, and love without the aid of genetic engineers, without addicting yourself to drugs? Are you ready to consider an alternate reality to that provided by the medical model of the human body as a biochemical machine? There's nothing to buy. There's no policies to take out. It's just a matter of suspending the archaic beliefs you've acquired from the scientific establishments so that you consider the exciting new awareness offered by leading-edge science. And that leads us to Chapter 1.